It's Thursday, July 11th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Whether you call it a just transition, a green transition, or greening the economy, there's a massive shift happening. That means community impacts. How do we get it right? What should this transition look like for your community? That's our question today. So we've done a few of these shows now, looking at what a quote unquote just transition means for this province. Right, we're trying to decarbonize, trying to green the economy, hit net zero targets, keep the earth habitable, all that. So there's a lot to talk about. Back in the winter, we had MHAs in to talk about climate policy. Much of that centered around the transition, right? The big shift that's happening. Then we did a show with a leading academic on climate change, right? Angela Carter. We had a union perspective. We had an activist one. After that, we did a show talking to folks about jobs and the transition, right? From training, that's here now, jobs now, and then also looking a bit down the road. That one, it was what? Kieran Hanley, CEO with EcoNext, Sean Leet, Managing Director and CEO World Energy GH2, which I'm sure is going to come out today. Karen Perry, Energy Transition Consultant with Hatch. Gary Thompson, CNA's Dean of Sustainable Development, right? So that was that conversation. But after that last one, I got a note. And that's what jump-started this show. So I'm going to read the email. The lines will be open, and we got some folks in studio I'm going to introduce. We're going to do all that. So here we go. Here's the email I got after that last Just Transition show we did on jobs. It says, after listening to much of the broadcast today with the focus being on jobs, I must say I was disappointed. As expected, it seems like most permanent jobs are going to be in St. John's and Stephenville. The real issue I see wrong with that is the sacrifice of rural NL for larger centres. These turbines will require the destruction of pristine wilderness. How many of your speakers today were living in Botwood, Port-au-Port, lower half of the Burin Peninsula, where there are going to be wind turbines in the thousands between these projects? Where is the long-term benefit for those people who will live in the close proximity of the wind farms themselves? I can only hope that this series will look at that. There is plenty of wind also in the Northeast Avalon, yet no major project seems to be planned there. Why? NIMBY. That's why, sir. Not in my backyard. As I said, rural NL is being sacrificed. No one has shown me the benefits outweighing the destruction about to be thrust upon parts of rural NL. My rant for today, sir. Thank you for taking the time to read. So that was from listener Paul after the last Just Transition show. So we get these emails on the show, and then when possible, we turn them around for other shows, because I think this is a great jumping off point for the discussion today. So for you listening, whether you call it just transition, that green transition, whatever you want to call it, the question is, how do we get it right? What should this transition look like for you and your community? That's the show. The numbers are 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. The text line is open, and I am personing it today, so be nice. 709-327-8206. Emails, thesignal@cbc.ca. I've got two guests in studio. Ashley Fitzpatrick, reporter at Atlantic Business Magazine. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, we've been colleagues for a while now.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, just a day or two.
Just a day or two.
And Cassandra Drodge, who works engaging communities for social and energy development, among many other things. Cassie, welcome back as well. How you doing?
Hi, Adam. I'm good. How are you?
Good. How do we get it right?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, a really great place to start. How do we get it right? I think coming from a community development perspective, generally speaking, I think that we all have different answers when it comes to that. And I think the email that you just started off with is a really great point there in terms of how, why, where, and what does that mean in terms of benefits, risk for individuals and for communities, And I think how we get this right directly goes down to community decision making, best practice models, especially when it comes to informed consent, consensus, knowledge around the risks especially, and how those risks, whether or not they weigh out the benefits of the projects. So I would start there for sure.
Ashley, mega projects and the role of citizens. Now, those are not just words I pulled out of the air. because you had a talk on this recently, right?
Yeah, I was asked to come in. The folks at the Harris Center were doing a conference, and the conference was really geared towards talking about the nitty gritty of democracy, and you've really got to be in the mindset of policy and regulations and the particulars of language and community engagement. I think that it was a very niche sort of event, but they were looking at they wanted to talk a little bit about Muskrat Falls and sort of how that falls into that question of proper engagement with communities and maybe using that to then leapfrog in a discussion of what it should look like. So myself and Kelly Bluduke, and they've had an invited professor from Spain who brought in some international perspective. And we had a really interesting conversation that sort of, for my piece, I think what I wanted to throw out was this idea that there are lessons that we can take away from Muskrat Falls and the experience there. And my big message from all of that was we need to find a way to reinstill respect for the processes and things that we have in place, like environmental assessments and the procedures there, and to have people find that it's worth their time to engage in those really formal things once again and feel there's merit in that. And I think that there's a real challenge for governments and for citizens on both sides in terms of that equation.
And why is there that challenge?
Yeah, well, I mean, the big thing is if you don't have faith in the process and you don't engage early on, then issues that you have, and it could be anything. It could be, right down to your own personal property, to, the question of bird migration in your area and what this may or may not mean if there's a big development in your backyard, so to speak, right up through to, provincial impacts on the labor force or what have you. If you don't engage early on to raise your points of view, you could have something that's really particular and important for people to discuss and to know about. And maybe it's just not on the radar, or not on the radar in the right way. Like maybe they're not folks who are making decisions at the end of the day, don't hear it from the right perspectives. And if they don't have that early on, missteps get made or things get forgotten about or not taken into consideration early enough so that conflicts start to appear as you move along. I mean, one of the big things when we're talking about this at a really high level is to ask ourselves, what are we talking about? Like, you've got to get particular to project and area and person. And I think that goes back to that point about community engagement. And people need to feel empowered in being able to say to the governments and see action and response from the governments that says, yes, we're hearing you on this, and here's how we're responding. And it's the same for industry. Industry needs to show that respect for the communities, but indicate very publicly and clearly that here's how we're responding.
Can we get a reminder, too, for folks, and I know most people will know your name, right, from your bylines, from your reporting, but remind us of just the reporting you've been doing over the last decade plus.
Yeah, so I'm definitely not the only person in this boat. There's some great folks at CBC, at NTV, VOCM. I started out, my very first job actually was on the West Coast. I was in Deer Lake reporting for the Western Star and got a really good sense of, how people in smaller communities in this province can feel very forgotten by the media, but more importantly by governments and like I said, these big machinations of here's where we're going as a province and people and maybe not feel like they're as central to that, dictation and thinking as they like to be, certainly. So I started there and moved over to the Telegram in St. John's, and I spent over a decade reporting with the Telegram and have since done some freelance work, but mostly work with Atlantic Business Magazine, doing more feature writing. And pretty much my drive has been natural resources, major projects, and sort of how that works right from, financing for the big companies down to community level.
So then to go from covering things like, the whole Muskrat Falls story, right? And then as we start having these shift conversations more, and then next thing you know, there's a chancellor visiting, and there's announcements, and then there's projects, and there's the processes. As a journalist, all of a sudden it's like ding, 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 like all these different storylines, right? All these different parts of the province.
A million potential stories.
What's that? So spoiler, I kind of know what it's like, but I'm not a beat or like this type of reporter anymore. So just explain to us what that is like for how you approach that.
Well, the one thing I'll say is, I give you my perspective right now is where you're facing, these wind, hydrogen, ammonia projects, for example. These are massive developments, and I mean massive, from the point of view of financing, from physical infrastructure, the labor requirements that are there, but also, the need for discussions with communities. So there are, when they file for environmental assessment, for example, one project can have these component studies, is what they call them, but it can talk about, aviation in terms of, bird life, and, there's a separate study then for mammals and what it could mean for mammals in the area. It could be a separate study for, your fisheries and not just commercial fisheries, but the environment for fish in general, interactions between federal and provincial governments. It goes on and on and on. So the starting point for me always has to be, okay, let's go out and talk to some people and see what's already on their radar and of concern. If you're talking to folks on the Environmental Transparency Committee in Port-au-Port, for instance, they have very clear ideas of what the province, both in that area in the company, but also the province as a whole, needs to start maybe having more regular discussions, more public discussions on, in order to come to some better understanding of exactly what is going on for the particular project with World Energy GH2 on the West Coast, the wind, hydrogen, ammonia project there, but also potential overlap, right? Because that's the thing that gets missed is you'll have your environmental assessment process, but then if you're talking to people in the communities, you start to hear about those points of overlap where, say there's a project that comes up in Corner Brook on top of the project that's going to be happening in Stephenville, Port-au-Port area. So what does that mean suddenly for, not just labor, but like available housing in the area? What does that mean when you start looking at the risks there and how meaty of a conversation is had, not just specific to one project, but in that overall sense of, okay, do we want this and how do we want this to happen if it happens? And those really are discussions for the public at large and not just for industry.
You are listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. Today we're talking about whether it's a just transition, green transition, greening the economy, the big shift that is happening now that will continue to happen as we try to reach things like net zero. The question is for our communities in Newfoundland and Labrador, how do we get it right? What should the transition look like for you and your community? And yeah, this kicked off with an email about a rural focus, right? Talking about, hey, we're not seeing this stuff, these developments in St. John's, but we're seeing them in rural areas. So if you want to join this conversation, if you have thoughts about you and your community, especially if you're a community that's seeing a wind energy ammonia development, give us a call, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text us your thoughts, 709-327-8206, or email us, thesignal@cbc.ca. You were just listening to Ashley Fitzpatrick, reporter at Atlantic Business Magazine. Cassandra Dodge is also here. Cassie works engaging communities for social and energy development. What's it been like for yourself? From you've been going through also in your education, you're doing community outreach as things have been kind of ramping up. What's it been like for you seeing all this and talking to folks?
Oh my gosh.
How long do I have?
Right? I'm like, okay, so we need an extra 2 hours here.
Not a problem. What we'll do, the show will be over. Pike will keep it rolling, and then I've got 2 more shows after this.
Yeah, just continue listening to my manifesto here, folks. It's fine. I guess from that perspective, and also from a Black racialized Newfoundlander, a youth perspective, I'd say youth underneath 30, it's been very overwhelming. Yeah. It's been really concerning as well. I grew up here, spent most of my life here, and so I found I'm just going to compare industry development really quickly. I'm going to compare oil and gas versus renewables. And I think when oil and gas started becoming a big thing here, I think I was really young, maybe grade 1 or grade 2. So 2001, 2002, it was really kind of coming out. But I remember in 2008 when I was around grade 8, grade 9, and we were making career decisions. And I was in Conception Bay South at the time. And I remember there was a lot of I wouldn't say education, but more so maybe lobbying around kind of getting the skills, the training, the necessary, I guess, baseline knowledge around oil and gas, around what it can do for individual communities, what it can do for us as youth, like especially we're coming up like into like jobs. A lot of us are like still in high school. We don't really have our futures planned out. So we're like, hey, give us suggestions. You know, we want to make money. We want to be here in the province. And of course, you know, we've seen the oil boom. And of course, we've seen a lot of people move out to Alberta or just like do that, like come from away, like the turnaround, like type of jobs. And so that's that. And you have many other segments where I'm complaining about oil and gas, so I will stop there. But I will make the comparison to say that I see a lack of engagement with youth, especially Black, Indigenous, newcomer youth, youth especially that are like in rural communities. There's not a lot of consultation when it comes to like what opportunities are there in terms of jobs, in terms of development, in terms of like even am I able to stay home? Like as we know, well, as I know, as a 29-year-old, like most of my friends that I went to school with or who moved out in further parts of the island or Labrador were kind of forcibly like they had to be forced to move out of the province either because of like career development opportunities or because like it wasn't exciting enough or because like, you know, that plane ticket to go like see Drake or Osheaga or something was like $800. Like you're not going to go there like making like, you know, what was it at the time? I think it was like $10-11 minimum wage. And even now I think it's around like 15, which is not like, you know, comparably to the cost of living. You're not going to have like a good quality of life. So I guess, you know, we talk about World Energy, G2 and stuff and these projects coming here, 164 wind turbines. And I know that we've had segments on jobs and what that could look like, but I the conversations that we're having, kind of what Ashley was saying, like at a high level, is it's not reaching down to like the schools. It's not reaching down to like your nan and pop or like the grandkids that are eventually going to grow up and like work in these industries. And, you know, by just doing a random search on the company website, it says that like, you know, the project is supposed to be, I think, a total of 31 years, including like the construction and deconstruction of it. What does that mean for someone, maybe not like myself, but someone who's 20 years old? That's not really something to keep you here. And even so, there's not enough like training. Like, where am I supposed to find training to go into that job? How am I going to be protected in terms of like my socioeconomic status? Like, am I going to have funding to go through these trainings? Like, are these jobs going to keep me on after they're finished, or I'm just going to be a stranded asset? Because I know they're talking about like cleaning up the materials of the wind turbines and stuff, but what about cleaning up the socioeconomic uncertainty after you leave these rural communities? And I'll stop my manifesto. But I will highlight the parallel between like the commercialization of renewables and the fishing industry here, and kind of how that equally left us, especially rural communities, with like this, oh, what do we do next? We see, you know, large scale operations. Like, I'm just going to compare like inshore fishing to trawling. We saw a lot of local enterprises dissolve. We've seen a lot of especially with local enterprise, we've seen a lot of local ownership dissolve as well. And also finances kind of dwindle away because people couldn't afford to refinance their licenses. They couldn't afford to kind of continue the way that they've been living. And so I feel like this. And before I get into that, I would also say that it was easier for the government, both federally and provincially, to create like more large scale like trawler fleets and to have like less boats in the water, but have like more impact, have like more people on the ship, like to man it. And so I feel like it's almost the same thing with these wind turbines. It's like, okay, let's put it all on the southwest coast. Let's just like manage that one project. We'll put another one in Corner Brook, another one down, I think in Arnold's Cove. They're looking at that now too, as I've been told. And so I think it's easier for them to say, hey, you know what? We'll just like commercialize the crap out of this and we'll just let these companies come in, do what they want to do. Oh, it's going to be here for 30 years. That's great, because we need to keep in mind these politicians, they only have 4-year election terms, and you know, like, this is a career for them. So like, whatever's going to get them into the seat for the next term, that's what they're going to look into.
Yeah, 30 years can feel like a long, long time away until you slowly but surely start to get older into your mid-40s. But that's a different show altogether about my thoughts on my own personal age here. Let's go to the phones. Chief Jason Benoit of the Benoit First Nation is on the line. Hi, Chief Benoit. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine.
So I was like in the lead up to today, we got in touch with you, and also noticing. So if we're talking about World Energy GH2 plans, appeals denied. And I'll just read the start of an online piece for CBCNL. 15 groups appealing World Energy GH2's plan to put hundreds of windmills on Newfoundland's west coast have been told their arguments were denied. So that's from Environment Minister Bernard Davis. He said the government followed its legislative process and determined there was no reason to accept the appeals concerning the project's environmental assets. You last spoke with CBC once the environmental side got its initial green light. I know you're optimistic around the project. So what do you think it can mean for yourself and your community?
Well, optimistic is what I'm known for.
Okay, yeah. It's your brand, sure, yeah.
I've been known to be hopeful when many people aren't hopeful. But for me, I think, again, it's we live, I'm a realist, and we live in communities that are shrinking because we're not keeping our children. They grow up and they move away. Seniors are are growing old, passing away, and our communities are shrinking. And there hasn't been anything since the 70s, really. It's been shrinking since then. And we haven't had anything, decades ago, we thought we were going to have a booming oil industry on the west coast here. We drilled all those wells, and it never happened. And maybe there's still something in the future, but it really petered off and didn't go anywhere. So we've been hoping for something to change the economy, the whole landscape for a long time. And, this comes along, and because, I'm kind of hopeful because maybe there's something that can be a catalyst for a changed economy, a renewed economy. But the other thing is, as First Nations, we do promote green, we do support green energy. As long as it strengthens our economy, it supports our communities, and it doesn't impact our lives, doesn't hurt the environment too much where anything would be irreparable. Obviously everything we do impacts the environment, but we have to be careful that our environmental concerns are met. But otherwise, I'm still very hopeful that these things themselves will kickstart a bigger economy behind it. With the spin-offs and other companies and other services and organizations. That's where I see the future jobs coming from not the projects themselves, but what comes behind them.
So then, like the project, the wind turbines go up, the building around that, the maintaining of it, the functioning over 20, 30 years. Your hope is that you'll see other businesses because of the few of the extra jobs that are there, and then whether it's from like restaurants to catering to places to stay to the building of houses, like a spin-off effect that way, is it?
Yes, well, it reminds me of the paper mill. When the paper mill left, a dozen companies left after them. Yeah, because they supplied services to the paper mill. Same thing when the fish plants closed. There was fish plant equipment manufacturers and metal fabricators. They all left as well, right? So that's the kind of logic that the frame of mind that I'm coming from in that regard. It's not just the direct windmill jobs; it's the indirect jobs. I think there probably will be way more indirect jobs.
As someone whose brand is optimism, is there anything that is there anything on the worry side of things for you with this? If things don't go as you hope?
Well, the only downside is if this doesn't go ahead at all, and we're still back in square one, and without any kind of new. We need to be part of this new green economy that stops polluting our air and our water and our soil. But I mean, if this isn't going to go ahead, then what else is going to help our community survive? Yeah. Will there be something else? I don't know. And then if it does go ahead, we need to be working with them to make sure that the impacts are as minimal as possible. The smallest footprint as possible. We got to make sure those things are done, and they're promising to do those things. But we, have to hold them to it.
Chief Benoit, thanks so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure.
All right. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Chief Jason Benoit there, Chief of the Benoit First Nation. You're listening to The Signal. We're talking about the just transition, right? The big green shift, changing the economy, thinking about climate change, thinking about our communities, how communities will or might be impacted by certain developments, right? Some wind, hydrogen, ammonia projects, and others, right? Other things that can be happening. So if you've got thoughts for us, give us a call. 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Text us, 709-327-8206, or the signal at cbc.ca, right? What should this transition look like for you and your community? Here with me in studio, Ashley Fitzpatrick, reporter at Atlantic Business Magazine, and Cassandra Drudge, who works engaging communities for social and energy development. Any thoughts on what Chief Benoit was saying here?
Yeah, I've definitely got a few. I mean, the one that really rings with me is, I think, an important piece to consider, which is that as much as you want to talk about, community engagement and effects on particular projects and even overlap of projects on this wind, hydrogen, ammonia in particular, I think it is really important to have a fulsome discussion on that piece that he touched on, which says, if not this, then what? So we have that larger picture idea of, okay, so oil and gas, we have a finite resource there. You can add additional projects and there'll be debates around that. But I think that there's an obvious pressure that says not to have additional projects. But more importantly, what we have in place right now that's recognized that's going to happen, production will drop off. There will be less money going into provincial coffers. The provincial government will have less money to work with from that very, very important, still financially speaking, industry to the province. And when we look at wind, hydrogen, ammonia, that is basically the answer that's been put up of, okay, as we see this issue with oil in terms of, a not endless runway for that, we're now going to have this come on board. We don't have the battery plants of Quebec and Ontario. We don't have the people here to have those sorts of really large manufacturing facilities, I would argue, or I certainly haven't heard an argument against that. And when we talk about what would be next for us, the province has had looks in the past, both pre-oil and during, our oil rush of what our economy looks like and how to maybe see a healthier province economically speaking. And it's always come back to that idea of a stronger localized business community, of seeing more businesses that do supply and service for the province's industries as they exist, trying to nurture the provincial businesses as they stand. That doesn't necessarily give you the answer for where does the money come for the public coffers. Over time, maybe you can build and start to come to sort of more of an equilibrium on the finances. But it is a big discussion of, if not this, then what?
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that has to happen almost entirely, not later, certainly now, but with that same discussion of, okay, and if we're doing, say, Project X, what does that mean for this community in particular or that community in particular?
I was listening to a podcast. I was out running a couple of days ago, listening to a podcast, and again, it was like a climate change, just transition type discussion, and they were talking about solar power in the States, right? And then the ramp up, especially in states like Nevada, where there's a lot of sunshine. But guess what? The topic that comes up a lot is folks who are in the communities there being like, "Well, what is this? How does this impact us? What's it like? How does this going to work for us? Like, do we want to look out and see these vast fields for solar power and solar energy, even though like it's cheaper now and there's getting electricity for it, and they're trying to figure out like." For battery storage, right? Because Las Vegas, I don't know if you know this, but it's kind of a nighttime city. Right? So like they still need energy at night. But anyways, these are the discussions. So like point being, we're not alone in these discussions for Newfoundland and Labrador, or Canada, or whatever else. These things are happening around the world, and they're all asking similar questions.
A really quick though example, leapfrogging off of that from Nova Scotia. So Nova Scotia went big into solar when it identified that it was going to need a lot of power to transition off of coal. And the interesting thing in Nova Scotia is they have these really active legislative committees. So they have a committee for natural resources that actually had active sessions that said, okay, here's the policy we brought in. Here's how we are, say, giving it a subsidy to industry or giving it a help to industry. And they question the people involved from the government side of, is this working? How is this working? What are the numbers? Everybody can then click onto a website on the Nova Scotia government site and take all that information in and then help it helps then in the public discussion and to make decisions of, say, how much support you want to see in the future and how much you would want to see maybe different policies brought in, or how you can provide input, because it's not just people from government. They'll bring in outside experts to those legislative committees. We don't have that here. We don't have those active committees. There's no accountability really in the same sort of format for governments. Not to say there's not accountability for the government. There are, the Auditor General may come in and do reports and that type of a thing. But those regular active committees that sort of fly under the radar 90% of the time, but then may bring forward something really interesting that prompts a change or an adjustment that helps a lot of people and pushes us forward in that transition in a positive way. They've seen a lot of new jobs added in Nova Scotia in solar, and I think it would be really interesting to take a look at that idea.
Yeah. No, Cassie, what do you think?
No, I agree. I think that, in terms of what, Chief Jason Benoit was saying, and when we're talking about keeping people here, keeping, industry here specifically in direct jobs, I also think we need to talk about diversifying as well. But I also think keeping in mind of what's happening in the province, when you still need to keep in mind of that scalability part. I'm still not over the fact that we have 164 wind turbines to be proposed. I don't think that anyone's opposed to the project themselves. It's kind of what you were saying. I think we're just opposed to the processes and really much the finite details that will get us the accuracy that we're looking for, and the information that we're looking for, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's solar, whether it's wind. I think we need to really take a step back and look at precedents, look at certain committees that can also I love a good committee. I've been asked as a social advocate to be on so many committees. I'm I don't have time. And I say that because it's we love to, I have a master's. I did sustainability research in fisheries, small scale fisheries. I can type up a fancy report. I can talk to 250 people. Is that going to, is Bernard Davis going to look at that, or is Andrew Parsons going to look at that and say, well, let me do something with that now, or let me bring that to the department? That has not happened yet. I'm not on a formalized committee, but I have spoken to MHA Davis on some of the environmental concerns as well as the social concerns about kind of developing these types of industries, as well as maintaining diversification and keeping friendly competition amongst industry and businesses, because that's really important too. But I think the accountability piece is key, and not only just a committee that's meets in St. John's once a month, maybe type of thing. Maybe it's a roll in and roll out committee, right? Maybe we have people it's mandatory for a quorum to have people in a certain amount of regions on the committee, or to think of okay, how can we start thinking of representation in terms of geographic placement, socioeconomic need, and even expert level of knowledge, because I feel I don't know, my grandfather is passed now, but I feel my grandfather, my pop, should know about wind project or the hydro project the same level as I do. And it shouldn't matter whether I go to Memorial University or, Oxford or something like that. I think that my level of knowledge it's not a privilege in this context. It's almost a right. So I think in terms of going back to that question, if not that, then what? Even in terms of going even reverse, or even maybe taking a couple of steps back from that, well then what is the thing we're even talking about? What is the project itself? Is it something for the people, or is it something for World Energy G2?
Yeah,
because,
so is it for World Energy GH2? Is it for the folks in the area? Or great questions.
And, holding not only the environment part of it accountable, but holding the social part of it, and also the financial part of it. We're talking about oil and gas industries and stuff. I just came back from Norway. I just came back from the Equinor AGM. They made $36 billion last year. They have less than 1% of their assets in renewables right now. We could be very well asking them. They have ideas in recycled wind turbines. They're leading in offshore wind right now in other parts of Europe. And I just find it very strange that we'll be continuing to subsidize potential projects kind of what Ashley was speaking to in terms of okay, if we're going to subsidize, like, I don't know, Bay du Nord, and it's like almost it's a double-edged sword, because like we see the global divestment, but we also see like the need to keep money in our province and to invest in other things. Well, why don't we start thinking differently in terms of how we actually gain capital finance, or how we create dividends from these companies and hold them accountable? Because like, I don't think Equinor should be making $36 billion, and then we have WGH2 in here like asking, what is it, Canada Investment Bank for money towards this project. We still haven't seen any dividend checks or any kind of like information with regards to how like local communities will see financial comebacks from this. And I'll still go back to that thing. What about in 31 years from now, and someone who's 20 years old is now 42 or 41? Where are they going to go?
Yeah, right.
Alberta.
Yeah, I will say, like, I've seen, I mean, the province has come out with, framework in terms of, what would be returned in the case of, say, individual wind turbines and companies paying back into the province for those types of things, and water usage and different elements. But it's a really great point that, like, if I'm, at home, I'm trying to get through my day to day, like, I don't have a lot of time to go digging around websites and looking up different things. It's really great for the companies, for governments, to create these really easily accessible, really easy to digest, web pages and mail outs, and just starting to do more to push out information and communicate information of what's on the table, to help facilitate the discussions. Because, I mean, there's a lot of questions that float around that I get that over and over and over that are really basic, fundamental things of, what are the size of turbines?
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no reason that there can't be like these big graphics that people put out that go, look, here's
everything you need to know.
They
Like,
did
here
it
are the
in
top
Nova
questions.
Scotia. For offshore wind, they put out just recently the latest installment of their plan for offshore wind, and it has a great graphic that shows the London Eye and this general scale of the turbines that are available. Not saying specifically what a company might use, but here are some of the options that you're seeing around the world and the general scale of them. And then instantly, as a person out in the community, I can look at that and go, okay, I get a sense of it at least. And now let's go further in that discussion.
Yeah, and you might get buy-in, or you might get better questions, but what you do get is more of an educated populace, right,
Yeah,
around something that's happening.
It's finding ways to advance the conversations into the point of where we're really getting to more of the specifics, as opposed to that introductory, like, what is wind energy and why is it here? I mean, the bottom line is they want to be here for the availability of land. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. That's why so many companies have taken
We're a
interest
windy
in
place
Newfoundland and
with
Labrador.
land. We're not special. Like, that's why we're special, right?
We're windy, and that's great, but it's not the wind isn't even like the main piece. It's that
land.
we have so much land for the number of people that we have, and it's the smaller population versus the land that's interesting to them, right? So, let's start really having people understand of like I said, that the basics of the industry should be readily available, and it shouldn't be a case of having to re-educate or search around to find basics on projects. And, I think there are credit to some of the companies out there who have been really trying to get out early and make engagements. I've heard public meetings on Buren, public meetings in Botwood. People may not like what they've heard or what they've seen presented, but at least it's a start.
Public meetings are
early
happening and taking place.
Introductions. And I think now the next step would be to sort of have more of multiple projects put kind of on the table for discussion at the same time, or broaden out the conversation a little bit to say, okay, do we as a province really understand what we're getting into here?
Like, connect all these dots. What do all, like, if the way things are going, what do all of these mean for all of us, and also in specific areas, right?
Yeah.
We've got Nick Mercer on the line with EnviroWatch NL. Nick Mercer, how are you?
Hey, Adam, I'm doing good. Happy to be joining you from Stephenville today, ground zero for questions of just transition.
Yeah, when we got in touch and I heard where you were too, I was like, well, this fits with the show. What are you doing in Stephenville?
I'm working on a research project in partnership with a couple of organizations on the Port au Port Peninsula, one being the Environmental Transparency Committee and my dear colleagues Nadine Talek and Marilyn Rowe, and the other being a community band, an inclusive community band, the West Wind First Nation, headed up by Tammy Park Sig High. So we're here doing some research design, crossing some T's, dotting some I's, and hope to be throughout the peninsula for the rest of July, collecting data.
Last time I saw you in our news for CBC and L, I think the words were gravely concerned for the government green light for the West Coast project with some conditions, right? And we have a news story just out yesterday. Appeals denied for World Energy GH2's plans on Newfoundland West Coast, and that's 15 groups appealing the plan to put hundreds of windmills on the West Coast. Do you have any thoughts around the progress here to expand on being gravely concerned, or just overall on these projects for Newfoundland and Labrador, and how a just transition should work for folks?
Yeah, I guess still gravely concerned is a fair characterization, but kind of the way I explain my position around the dinner table is that this idea of energy transition is inevitable, right? No matter what happens, energy transitions are going to evolve. Populations are going to grow. Populations are going to shrink. New industries are going to emerge. Technology will exist 5 or 10 years from now that we couldn't even dream of today. So the energy system of my kids will inevitably look different than our energy system of today. But even though energy transition is inevitable, I believe firmly that a just energy transition is not inevitable in terms of who's capturing the benefits, who's controlling and permitting the project, what diverse lifeways, experiences, and knowledge are recognized when we make projects on development. So a lot of my work is celebrating energy transition, yes, but making sure that it's embedded with justice components to the greatest degree possible.
So then what more would you like to see being done?
Well, I'd like to see communities be able to capture a fair share of the benefits here. So the predominant development model has benefited people at the top, corporations, wealthy stakeholders, the folks who have traditionally done well in society. So I can point to one example for you. There's a small wind farm where I live now on Prince Edward Island in the rural municipality of Eastern Kings. And this project, I think it's only 30 megawatts in size, pales in comparison to the size of what World Energy GH2 is proposing. But this project produces millions of dollars on an annual basis in profits for the Crown Corporation that owns it. And you can contrast that with a local municipality, who has to deal with these things, who has had their lifeways disrupted because of this project, who get about $25,000 per year as a result of the project. So the weighting of the benefits is really out of balance here. And I fear that if we continue with the same model of private sector-led resource development, we're going to continue to benefit the people at the top. And a really easy way to change this is by transitioning to more participatory models of resource development. So instead of letting these companies come in and have their way and extract resources for as cheaply as they possibly can, we privilege local participation. We privilege cooperatives. We privilege ownership and equity in the hands of communities. And this is how I believe we move from peanuts in terms of the benefits rural municipalities get to actually life-changing, transformative amounts of resources. Communities need to be owners, not just passive hosts.
Nick Mercer, I'll let you get back to work. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Nick Mercer there with Enviro Watch NL. All right, so we have what Nick was saying. I'm going to go back to my guest shortly because we've got a caller message and we got a couple emails. So it's going to be a choose your own adventure for what you want to respond to here. All right, here we go. Caller, quote, "Do we learn anything from muskrat?" Unquote. So there's that. Another email that came in. I'm shortening it, but it's will agreements benefit the towns on the front lines of the wind farms the most? It doesn't look that way. It appears the support for these projects was carefully orchestrated while people were dealing with and trying to get past the COVID pandemic. Minister Andrew Parsons and some local councillors have taken the stand that if you don't like what you are doing, then vote us out next time. I see that as a total abdication of the responsibility of their jobs as elected officials. Their jobs are to listen to the people they represent. It is fine to say people can vote them out next time, but there's no election now, and this project is for the next 30 years. In other words, the project is too large and the possible effects too long for people to stand by and say nothing, to just let our elected officials do what they want unchallenged, or to be just be dismissed as wrong. So that's another email that just came in. From my other email, from Christina, it says, thank you for covering the topic. My husband and I live in Point Leamington, and one of the towns impacted by these projects. We've been asking questions to government and the proponents since December. I still haven't received answers to over 100 questions, though the company has responded with non-answers and even misleading information, according to Christina. An example of this was my question about potential impacts from ammonia, whether through spills or a larger disaster. Their response was ammonia is dangerous, but we are creating green ammonia. For your information, the final product of ammonia is the same, but the power source to create green ammonia is renewable source. And there's more to the email, but time constraints right now. It said, again, we've sent over 100 questions and have spent hours and hours researching and discussing with other industry experts. So, a lot of the flavor here does come down to communication and getting folks to understand what is happening. People have questions. People want to know who benefits, and are the benefits going to be for local communities, especially the ones living next to things like wind turbines and windmills. Ashley, what are your thoughts?
I think one thing I would jump in with is when I started off, I was talking about sort of the responsibilities on the citizen side and the government side to instill faith in these processes of review and input. And I think this is a big one where I would say this is a great opportunity for the government side to start injecting some help to produce faith in these processes by encouraging companies to be very specific, to start from the ground point of the starting viewpoint of saying, look, these individuals who are reaching out to communicate with you directly have taken the time to read about it, to try and understand the project. In most cases, if they're making the effort to communicate, they've done this, and they have specific questions. Try and be as specific as you can in your answers. And if they're not seeing the companies do it, have the government step in with some of that basic information. Let's start debunking, if there are issues to be debunked, these statements, or if they are correct statements, then have somebody from, say, environment within government endorse it publicly. Like, why not have a page of general information that specifies, like, here's exactly what ammonia is and what you should be thinking about when you hear about it, a project happening near you. Then the questions maybe get more specific to the companies. They feel less exhausted, for repeat questions. But most importantly, there's a sense from people then that there's engagement, that there's a sense that they're being heard and indication that they're being heard publicly. And I think that that's a big thing for people that, like I said, governments can very much play a role in, even though I appreciate that they also have limited resources.
Let Cassie go quickly. We've got some folks in the queue, so just quickly, just brief thoughts.
Yeah, oh my God, my brief thoughts.
Keep it to 60 seconds if you can.
All right. I was snapping and clapping at Nick Mercer, especially for integrating, the principles of justice and equity into these new energy development models. I think that we need to steer away from the very almost oligarchy, like business-oriented models. We need to start considering differential, non-traditional benefits. So it might not be like $1 billion revenue at the end of the year. It might just be actually like a dividend check of like 70% to the community, and they got like a recreation center or something like that. There should be more ways to measure success, and those measurements should be absolutely monitored and prescribed and executed as well by community members, because they're going to be the ones in the communities 30 years from now. They're going to be the ones dealing with the deforested land after those wind turbines are taken up. So I think that we need to directly go back to more cooperative, more community-based ownership models. That's something that Norway has taken upon themselves, especially with their oil fund. We can learn some lessons from that. So I'll stop there.
Dick Whitaker's on the line. Thank you for calling in, sir.
Yep, how are you? When I look at any of this stuff, we're supposed to be an energy powerhouse and so on, and all, as it's been said numerous times recently. But the real trick is to turn that into other employment, other industries, and so on. And that hasn't. I don't see a plan for that. If you can use cheap energy to do things, steal work away from elsewhere, if you want to be honest about it, manufacturing things or whatever it is. But to just have it to heat homes and this, that, and the other. Now, certainly the export to Germany and so forth, the idea behind that is a partial sort of a thing. But to turn it into large amounts of work and so on is a different thing. And it seems to me that we need to use it to leverage some more manufacturing and so forth, that sort of thing, to get the best out of it. Because otherwise, we're just, again, hewers of wood and drawers of water, you know?
Yeah, very much so.
So that's, I mean, I could go on at length for a lot of other things, but the other thing also, we need to all understand that climate change is advancing rapidly on us, coming down like a ton of bricks on everywhere else. And again, we're seem to be in some ways in a better position than some other places. You know, we're not got the burnout out that's going on in central Canada and so on. That may be to our advantage as well. So we need to really forecast what we can do with what's coming down the track, you know?
No, great points, Mr. Whitaker. And I've got one more caller to get to just before we round the corner to the end of the show. Fine. So I appreciate your call, and I hope you're having a good summer.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Dick Whitaker there. Let's go to Paul Pike, who is on line 3, calling from the Burin Peninsula. Hi, Paul.
Good day, sir. How are you?
Goodbye. How you doing?
Not bad. I'm the guy that wrote the email that got the ball rolling on this show.
Thank you. Look, I do want to say thank you so much for that, because when we do shows, and you can't always fit everything in, or do everything in one show. So when I get an email like that and I can do another one, I do my best to do it. So I really appreciate you getting in touch with your points on it.
Yeah, not a problem at all, my friend. I live here on the Burin Peninsula. Have for all my life. This is a project that is going to literally, if it goes ahead, change the face of the Burin Peninsula as we see it now, both from an industry standpoint and from a community standpoint. What we have here in particular case is we have a large plant going just outside Marystown, just outside the boundary for Marystown. Then we have 3 phases to a proposed Everwind project, and I speak of Everwind because that's the one I'm most familiar with. 450 wind turbines located on the bottom part of the boot below Marystown. They will be buttressed by communities such as Lawn, Lord's Cove, Lammaleen, Grandbank, Fortune, Garnish, Frenchman's Cove. These are going to be scattered through the countryside in that region. So we're going to go from having a relatively pristine, not untouched, but relatively pristine environment to roads connecting all these, transmission lines connecting all these, substations helping direct the power, all to the plant in Marystown. And that has to have a profound effect on the environment, the number of moose, the birds, whatever the case might be, for the foreseeable future. And that's not counting the fact that, as I mentioned in the second email that you mentioned a moment ago, there's 3 phases to this project on the Burin Peninsula. Above Marystown, between Marystown and Terranceville, there's proposed 750 wind turbines. And then between Terranceville and Swift Current, is my understanding, there's another 350 before that, after that. So then once you leave there, you're going to be getting into the project that's being discussed for the Clarenville Come By Chance area. So basically, you'll be leaving Marystown and driving all the way to Doe Hills and be able to look and see these roads and wind turbines that are several hundred feet in height, approximately between, I've heard numbers anywhere between, counting the height of the blades, anywhere between 475 to 550 feet in height. Some have said taller, but it all depends on the final spec and the megawatt rating of the wind turbines. Obviously, if you go with a higher megawatt turbine, it's a bigger one in height. So,
well, we're coming up to the end. You got 15 seconds just to close it, because we're going to get cut off by news. So, final thought from you on this, if I could.
To be honest with you, I don't think this is the project we should be exploring at this time.
All right.
Then I think there are other ways that we could introduce wind energy into the province more beneficial to the people in Newfoundland. This seems to be a project in spite of the people of Newfoundland.
Paul Pike, thank you so much. Thank you for the emails, and thank you for calling.
Not a problem, my friend. Thank you.
Cheers. And folks, the signal at cbc.ca for any and all thoughts and show ideas. We're out of time. Paul's call, they're overlapped on, I mean, we talk about overlap with projects. We talk about questions around stuff. I think it's a good way to end today. I do want to say, because we're out of time, thank you to Ashley Fitzpatrick and Cassandra Draws for being my guests today. Thank you for listening. The show will be up on YouTube at some point this afternoon. John Blake's looked at me now. He's giving me a nod, thumbs up even. It sounds great, John. For tomorrow, different show altogether. We're going to be live at Bannerman Park for Folk Fest, teeing up the Folk Fest, and we're going to have an interview with a very special musical guest. I won't say it now, just in case for some reason it doesn't happen, but do tune into the show tomorrow. You're not going to want to miss it. Bye.